An ancient courtyard, bathed in afternoon sun. A master sits on a stone bench, surrounded by his students. They are looking past the mechanics of the battlefield to the moment the dust settles, when a conqueror must face the population they just defeated. One of the students speaks up with a question that has plagued generals for centuries. Why is it that an army can sweep across a massive, sprawling empire and easily hold it for generations, but when that same army tries to occupy a single, tiny, independent city, they face endless, exhausting rebellion? The teacher's answer is surprisingly simple. When you invade a foreign land, your biggest threat isn't the enemy's stockpiles of weapons or the height of their walls. The real danger is what lives inside the minds of the people you're trying to rule. Marching your troops into the capital is only the first step. Whether you can actually keep that territory depends entirely on the psychological habits the locals have built up over hundreds of years. Some societies have only ever known absolute kings. For generations, the people in this kind of state have been conditioned to look up to a single, centralized authority figure. They are used to servitude. We can see this clearly when we look at the ancient Persian Empire. When Alexander the Great marched into Asia, he managed to conquer the massive kingdom of Darius in just a few short years. When Alexander died shortly after his victory, the vast territory did not splinter or rebel. His successors held on to it easily, because the local population was already deeply programmed to obey whoever held the title of master. In a system like this, power flows strictly from the top down. Once an invading army defeats the king and eliminates his family, the daily routine of the average citizen barely shifts. They simply take the taxes and the loyalty they used to give the old king and hand them over to the new occupant on the throne. If this political structure is a massive tent held by a single pillar, a conqueror only has to knock out that support and slide a new one in. The people accept the new structure without a second thought. A vast centralized kingdom might field a huge army that is difficult to defeat in battle, but once you win, holding the territory requires very little effort. The habit of obedience does the work for you. Now let's look at the exact opposite scenario, a bustling, self-governing city-state where the citizens make their own laws. There is no king to overthrow. We find the best historical examples of this in the city-states of ancient Greece, places like Sparta or Athens. These were societies built on civic participation and self-governance. This naturally leads to an obvious question. If there is no king to replace and no throne to sit on, how do you actually take control of the society? The problem for an invader is that the local habit isn't obedience, the habit is active participation. Political power isn't held by one family. It is distributed across councils, local assemblies, and the individual citizens themselves. If a monarchy is a tent on one pole, a republic is an archway of interlocking blocks, each supporting its own weight. When an occupier forces its authority inside, it puts violent pressure on every single piece of the society. Because power is shared so widely, you can't simply decapitate the government and expect the body to follow. By invading, you make a personal enemy out of the entire population. These states might be small enough to easily defeat on the battlefield, but pacifying them is another story entirely. The occupying army quickly runs into a psychological barrier they cannot defeat with swords: political memory. This is the collective, enduring recollection of what it actually felt like to be free. You can think of this memory as a dormant virus living within the occupied population. No matter how harsh the subjugation gets, or how many soldiers patrol the streets, that idea survives, quietly spreading from one mind to the next. It does not matter how much time passes, or even how benevolent the new rulers try to be. A people accustomed to self-rule will never simply forget their old laws and their old institutions. They will wait patiently for years, and the moment they sense a delay in troop movements, a foreign distraction, or a brief instance of weakness from the occupier, they will seize the excuse to violently rebel and reclaim their autonomy. Trying to rule a formerly free people turns into a state of perpetual, exhausting warfare. You are no longer fighting a rival army. You are fighting against human nature and memory itself. In the courtyard, the conversation shifts from the movement of legions to the invisible strength of culture. It becomes clear that a general's sword can dismantle an army, but it cannot touch the entrenched habits of a society. Typical strategies, like installing a local governor or a puppet council, often fail in a city that was once free. Citizens see those new rulers as a betrayal of their traditions and will eventually rally to the cry of their old laws. Because you cannot bribe a population into forgetting its past, a conqueror is left with a brutal choice. To hold a city like this, you must either move your own court there to suppress the inevitable sparks of rebellion, or reduce the entire place to rubble. If an occupying power chooses to ignore the psychological history of a territory, they are guaranteeing their own eventual downfall. A population that has only ever known submission will accept a new master because it is the only way of life they understand. But a society that has tasted self-rule will never accept a leash. For any conqueror, throughout all of history, the heaviest doors and the highest walls can eventually be breached. But the memory of freedom is the hardest fortress to break.